Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, WWE Payback 2023. This past Saturday, I was in attendance. And a part of this pay per view I kind of want to get at is essentially what WWE has been doing all year round so far. And that is talking about each and every one of these premium live events is just breaking records. And I didn't think this week would be one of those ones where they would tout broken records. There wasn't the traditional press conference after Payback where Triple H comes out and he just talks about how great everything was. But either way, they still did put out this past week that they broke records for Payback, for Payback history, Pittsburgh history, all of that good stuff, merchandising history. And I've been in the location of every single pay-per-view for WWE this year except for Backlash in Puerto Rico and Night of Champions in Saudi Arabia. And I was not in the arena for Money in the Bank, but I was in the arena the night before and around the arena. So essentially, I was at Money in the Bank, just not physically in a seat for the pay-per-view proper, but I was around the O2, I was at their SmackDown, I was at the store, I was everywhere around Money in the Bank except for inside during the pay-per-view event, so I could see firsthand what it was all about when it comes to breaking records for that, and I was at Royal Rumble, Elimination Chamber, WrestleMania, SummerSlam, and now Payback. So I can tell you a little about why some of these records are being broken, and first and foremost, give credit to WWE and what you can see at home, and that is simply the cards have been good. And what makes these cards good is not necessarily that wrestling is on an uptick because wrestling itself is better, but WWE is finding a way to manufacture these cards and manufacture these pay-per-views to be more wrestling-centric and to be better. It kind of reminds me of what would have been a good idea back when there was the brand exclusive pay-per-views. Now, if you remember the brand exclusive pay-per-views, it meant that the SmackDown guys only wrestled 6 times a year on pay-per-view. The Raw guys only wrestled 6 times a year on pay-per-view. So, exception of SummerSlam and WrestleMania, there might be a month off for, the champions of each show. So this whole thing of Roman Reigns not being on a pay-per-view, that's not new. Batista, when he was a SmackDown champion, wasn't on the Raw pay-per-views. John Cena, when he was the Raw champion, wasn't on the SmackDown pay-per-views. So everybody not being on every card isn't new. The difference is WWE is doing it now, so pay-per-views aren't brand exclusive, but they are essentially keeping the numbers down so that everybody from every championship isn't on every pay-per-view. For example, when we had the brand exclusive pay-per-views, you'd have one champion, one women's champion, one tag team champion, and then on the other show, the same thing. And here you're keeping that, right? One world champion was not on this card. One women's champion was not on this card. And one, singles championship, the Intercontinental, was not on this card. So they found a way to make a good middle ground with these pay-per-views. They're building them up good in the sense of they're keeping the cards concise. It was still over 3 hours long with only 6 matches on the card. We didn't need to throw in the SmackDown Women's Champion to this. We didn't need to throw in the Intercontinental Champion to this. And I think that keeps those titles fresh. A lot of people were complaining at SummerSlam that Becky and Trish weren't on the SummerSlam card. But I was at SummerSlam and you watch it at home. As Triple H said, it was plenty long. It was a good card. And, it wasn't missing Trish and Becky. And this card, this card had Trish and Becky. This one didn't have Bianca and Charlotte. This one had Trish and Becky instead. So I think that's a good middle ground to kind of make sure that these pay-per-views are fresh. Just because you go to every pay-per-view doesn't mean you're going to see everyone on the roster. You're going to just see some matches that are at this time pay-per-view worthy, as well as keeping the television product pretty good, because this past week on Raw, we saw Gunther and Chad Gable in the main event for the Intercontinental Championship. Clearly, that was a pay-per-view worthy feud. That was a pay-per-view worthy match. But in order to not bog down Payback, they made sure that the Intercontinental Championship was in Charlotte and at the Raw, not on the pay-per-view. So good on WWE for, even with the build, because I will say the Payback build isn't the greatest. Okay, it's not the build, but the matches that they do have, we're keeping things down so that WWE can do their best AEW impression and focus on the wrestling, right? 6 matches, Every match was 10 minutes long with the exception of Rey Mysterio and Austin Theory, which was 15 seconds short of that. I mean, but your opening contest was 20 minutes. The next match between Miz and LA Knight was 15:45. The tag team match was 20:45, right? Rhea Ripley and Raquel Rodriguez, even though it wasn't the greatest match, 17:20, right? Super long if you think about that compared to a women's match from 10 years ago. And then the main event, 26 minutes and 5 seconds. So everything got proper time. Everything was of a proper length. There wasn't a lot of nonsense. There wasn't filler. There wasn't Viking Raiders. There wasn't Hit Row. There wasn't just things on a pay-per-view to have things on a pay-per-view. One other thing that I'm excited about the last couple of years is that WWE has been removing matches from the pre-show. People always complain that WrestleMania a couple years ago was 7 hours long. The show was 5 hours long, but, well, there was matches on the pre-show, which essentially are WrestleMania matches, which make the whole thing 7 hours. At least now, when the show starts, the show starts. I don't need to be in my seat at these pay-per-views until 8 o'clock, because that's when the show starts. There's none of this nonsense before. There's none of this get at the arena at 7 o'clock to watch a 5-minute match and then sit there for 45 minutes. Just give me the matches, give me the show, no waste, right? 6 matches on the pay-per-view card, no waste. And they had the Grayson Waller effect, which I think, had which pushed this, I believe, over the 3-hour mark. Without this, it would have been about 3 hours. But that whole Grayson Waller effect with Cody Rhodes as the special guest this past week, in which he didn't reveal anything about himself. So we don't really know what's next for Cody Rhodes, but he revealed that Jey Uso is on Monday Night Raw now. So he kind of furthered the Bloodline storyline without really furthering his own storyline. I guess we'll see if that's also furthering his own storyline as time goes on. But overall, keeping these pay-per-views concise, keeping them so we don't have to have everything on the card. Kudos on WWE for doing that. Now, what they are doing in the arenas and what maybe you're not noticing at home to get these numbers up, these record-breaking numbers for each and every one of these pay-per-views. Now, Payback, it didn't break arena records like Money in the Bank did. It didn't break non-WrestleMania pay-per-view records like SummerSlam did. It just broke Payback records and Pittsburgh records. And it's easy. When it comes to revenue, it's kind of simple, right? The ticket prices nowadays, they cost more money than they ever did before. I can't imagine that there was more people in crowd in Pittsburgh than there has been ever before. There was simply just a higher ticket price. WWE reported that there was 14,000 in attendance at the pay-per-view, but during their record-breaking tweet put out there that there was about 12, but either way is still reporting revenue in the records because of the fact that ticket prices cost more money. Just simple as that, right? Also, one thing when it comes to merchandise, and the merchandise one is simple. I've gone to many WWE pay-per-views in the past, and it's clear. Here's how merchandise worked with Payback or any other pay-per-view before. The show starts at 7 or 8 o'clock, right? The doors open at 6 o'clock. You have from 6 o'clock until the show is over to buy merchandise. That's it. Now, each and every one of these pay-per-views has a dedicated store, a store that opens a day before the pay-per-view. So WWE was selling Payback and WWE merchandise in Pittsburgh on Friday. On Saturday in the morning, I went to the Payback store hours before the show. So essentially, I bought my merchandise long before the pay-per-view ever was on the air. And that's helping them break these records, right? If Walmart was only open 2 hours a day, it wouldn't make as much money as if Walmart was open 24 hours a day. It's just simple economics. It's just the opportunity to buy things. There's this Payback store that's open on Friday. In some cases, like SummerSlam, it was open on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. You're going to break records, right? If you're selling merchandise for 4 days instead of just 3 hours. I went to WrestleMania 23 back in Detroit at Ford Field. You could buy WrestleMania merchandise from like 4 p.m. that afternoon until the show was over. That was it. All right. Now you can buy it for days in advance. I mean, I was buying a WrestleMania shirt and WrestleMania hat days before WrestleMania ever, took place, back in LA. So that helps, obviously, with the merchandise record. But another thing that adds to the merchandise record is also the abundance of merchandise. And what I mean by that is WWE, if you went to Payback, you went to Battleground, you went to any non-WrestleMania or SummerSlam kind of pay-per-view back in the day, you went to Night of Champions, you went to Armageddon, whatever the pay-per-view was, here was your options. You had your typical WWE merchandise you can get at a house show, at Raw, at SmackDown, all your favorite superstars, The Rock, Stone Cold, Batista, John Cena, they're all there. But then when it comes to pay-per-view specific items, you had the event t-shirt. You had the Armageddon shirt with the match card on back. Do you want a small, medium, large, or extra large? That's your options. Now, there's many more options for someone like myself who doesn't want the Payback shirt. I'm in my 30s now, and I'm not going to lie. I don't wear a lot of these wrestling shirts that are not specific to a certain wrestler I like that I can wear more often. The whole Payback I was there shirt, doesn't resonate with me. Frankly, I don't really care that WWE doesn't have the pay-per-view shirts with the match cards on the back and what matches were at the show. They more just put on the back, I was there. And frankly, it's kind of a nerdy thing, right? I'm not trying to brag to anybody that I was there, especially to the non-wrestling community. I know a lot of you out there who watch this, you're wrestling fans. I'm a wrestling fan, but it's like going to monster trucks, right? Or going to a minor league baseball game. You buy a shirt and says, I was there, right? Is anybody ever going to look at you and say, hey, you were at the Brooklyn Cyclones minor league baseball game. I can see it. Your shirt says you were there. I'm so jealous. Not really, right? Not any non-wrestling fans are going to see your shirt and see, oh boy, you were there? You were so lucky to be at a pay-per-view I've never heard of for WWE, and you watch WWE in your 30s and you're bragging that you went. It's kind of not a kind of shirt I like. If they had the match card on the back, it's more subtle, it's more my style. So these I was there shirts, not my style. I'm not going to buy it. I don't wear a lot of wrestling shirts, right? But they still sold me on some Payback merchandise, right? And more importantly, Payback merchandise that's a little bit cheaper, because let's say I was in the market for a shirt, or I want a shirt and I'm a little kid and I want to bring my parents and I want them to buy me a Payback shirt. $40 is a lot for a shirt, right? But maybe $5 Payback magnet, maybe a $15 Payback frame, maybe a Payback winter hat that I think was about $20, a Payback hockey helmet. So there were some other Payback specific items that weren't necessarily as much as a shirt. That were pretty cool and very exclusive. So it was a way to get $10 or $15 out of me to buy Payback exclusive merchandise if I wasn't in the market to buy the Payback shirt, right? And then they also had some high-end Payback stuff if you were in the market for it, like a Payback hockey jersey that's like $70, or a Payback hoodie, $70, $80. So a lot more merchandise that's Payback exclusive. So if you already got your John Cena shirt, you already got your Judgment Day shirt, you already got your Bloodline shirt, right? What do you want to buy at this pay-per-view that's specific to this pay-per-view? They've got a lot more merchandise to sell. So that's where they get these revenue numbers up for both merchandise and, the gate itself. It's not just wrestling is better, but it's this strategic strategy of what kind of merchandise we're going to sell, and, what prices we're going to sell it at, how long we're going to sell it at, the price of tickets for the event. So good on WWE for breaking another record for Payback this past Saturday. And, I imagine Fastlane is going to be the exact same, right? I imagine Fastlane is going to break records for the largest crowd in that arena in Indianapolis. I don't necessarily know how they're going to do it for Indianapolis as a whole, because WrestleMania 8 was in Indianapolis. So that would be a tough one. Even though tickets for WrestleMania 8 were probably not that expensive, and they didn't, get a capacity crowd of 90,000. They got about 50 to 60,000 at the old Hoosier Dome in Indianapolis for WrestleMania 8. I think it's still going to be tough for an arena to break a revenue record for WrestleMania 8, but it definitely will break the revenue record for that arena. It'll definitely break revenue records for Fastlane itself, and like I said, because they're going to be selling Fastlane merchandise all weekend long, not just exclusive to the pay-per-view itself. And they'll probably make sure that the card is concise for people like me who are going to maybe watch that one on TV. It's going to be 6 matches. We might not have the Bloodline. That time, we might not have Seth Rollins and Shinsuke Nakamura in what looks like it's going to be a rematch down the line, right? They might skip that from Fastlane and give us something else. So that is how WWE is setting these records. That's how WWE is getting the crowds in the door. But I will say about this pay-per-view specifically, I don't know if they would have been able to pull off the full arena. I will say, when it comes to Royal Rumble, that's the Royal Rumble, sold out a stadium, no doubt, right? Elimination Chamber, that was the hottest Elimination Chamber. It was more than just skewing the numbers, right? That Elimination Chamber had Bobby and Brock on the undercard, had Edge and Beth on the undercard, right? So that Elimination Chamber didn't have too much of a problem selling out, right? And that might have sold out the entire arena, especially for the first time of being a pay-per-view in Montreal in a very long time. And then obviously the pay-per-view in Backlash, no problem selling out the whole arena because of its exclusivity to coming to Puerto Rico for the first time in 18 years. And Money in the Bank, obviously they could have sold out a stadium for Money in the Bank. Don't know why they didn't, but that was just breaking all sorts of revenue records for an arena. But this time around, I will say the Payback tickets being, in quote unquote demand, it wasn't difficult, let's just say. Of all the pay-per-views this past year, I want to say getting tickets to go see Payback, in an arena wasn't too difficult. So if they didn't have the traditional Monday Night Raw SmackDown kind of set, and they tried doing the Backlash and Money in the Bank thing where they sold out the whole arena, we're not talking, the whole arena except for behind the screen. We're talking get rid of the screen, sell the whole place out. Might have been difficult. I don't know if they would have sold the whole place out. There was still a few seats that were available like day of. So it wasn't the hottest ticket. It probably, like I said on the podcast last week, building up to it, probably the least anticipated pay-per-view thus far this year. It wasn't this unbelievable, like, what a hot card. This is, rivaling WrestleManias. It wasn't that, right? It was a good B-show card. And WWE, like I said, congratulations on finding a way to make the B shows feel like solid, good B shows. Because you go back 10 years and some of these B shows, they're feeling like C and D shows, right? So, good for WrestleMania to feel like WrestleMania, good for SummerSlam to feel like SummerSlam, and good for the non-SummerSlams of the world to still have their place and feel their importance. A good card overall. Jey Uso is now on Monday Night Raw. It's going to be very interesting to see where this goes. Obviously, we saw this past week on Monday Night Raw in the fallout. Dominic, talking to Jay about joining the Bloodline and the possibility of doing that. Let me rephrase all of that. I said Ray, I said Bloodline, Jay, Dom, they're talking Judgment Day, right? And kudos on WWE and that storyline right there, kind of that intrigue right there of Jay joining a new family. He left the Bloodline. Is he going to join a new crew in the Judgment Day? I mean, I don't think he's going to. It's going to be interesting. I heard this past week from Bubba Ray Dudley on his podcast talk about what about the turn of not accepting JT McDonough into the Judgment Day and accepting Jey Uso instead. I think that's pretty intriguing. But, going back to Payback and some of the other things we saw, exclusive, obviously, to Judgment Day, being there in person, there's not a lot of things I can tell you about being somewhere in person that can kind of spoil what it is to watch at home. But I will say, and I was disappointed myself because it spoiled it for me, the magic was ruined for Jared in attendance at PPG Paints Arena this past Saturday. So, WWE, I'm a little annoyed, right? Halfway through the Kevin Owens, Sami Zayn, and the Judgment Day Tag Team Championship match, when they were starting to fight on the outside, WWE crew set up the pyrotechnics. It made me think, okay, maybe we're going to get a run-in real quick. Maybe someone's going to come out, but we all know when somebody comes in as a run-in, whether it's Rhea Ripley or Dom or as Zoe Stark in the opening match, they don't give them an entrance. They don't give them all the hullabaloo of a traditional coming out to the ring as if they were having a match, right? They just run out to the ring. So they're not going to have pyro for Rhea Ripley running out real quick and interrupting this match. So that only led to one thing, and that was that Judgment Day was going to win the match, and they were going to have the celebration, and they were going to have the pyro afterwards. And I can say one thing, WWE, the pyro, the way they set it up, it's real quick. They just throw out the pyro sticks and run off the stage. And I think with the walk from the Judgment Day to the rampway before that pyro went off, I think that left them more than enough time to set that pyro up, and they could have done it then. Right, so them setting the pyro up and putting it in place a good 10 to 15 minutes before the finish of this match really ruined it for me, because that was one of the more surprise results of the night, and I kind of had an inkling I knew where that match was going because they set the pyro up for that match ahead of time. But overall, still a great match. I love the element of Sammy and Kevin, getting out the hockey jerseys with Mario Lemieux and Sidney Crosby and using the sticks. That was a cool element. Just an overall good use of that Pittsburgh Steel City street fight, right? We use this street fight terminology all the time. I think they use it at every single house show. The Syracuse street fight, the Buffalo street fight, the Binghamton street fight, whatever city they're in, they want to make it, seem more unique. And I actually want to say a Pittsburgh Steel City street fight, the name of that match going in made me feel like this was really a house show caliber match, because that's what you do at house shows to kind of get the local crowd into it. You don't normally need to have some sort of local element for a pay-per-view, because it's a pay-per-view. You're appealing to a worldwide audience. You don't necessarily celebrate where you are so much. Like Money in the Bank's a good example, right? Nothing on the Money in the Bank card itself was, like a London street fight, right? It's Money in the Bank. It's a big time card. You don't need to have that whole like locality element to it like you do for house shows. So I do say though they hit a home run with that match. Good on WWE. Great match. I'm fine with the result. It takes me back to the two-man power trip, Triple H and Stone Cold Steve Austin, when they held all the gold in 2001. Judgment Day right now, holding all the gold. Very similar to the Bloodline, obviously, not too long ago, holding all the gold. So, we're transitioning from one major faction of the Bloodline to the Judgment Day. And if you want to make the Judgment Day really comparable to the Bloodline, they're doing a good job at it. And they are now the tag team champions. It makes you wonder where Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn, because they put out this past week on Twitter, with this loss and with the tag team belts coming off of Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens, this really is kind of the unofficial end of their time with the Bloodline and that storyline. Because while they had the tag team belts, they always had to remember that's who they defeated for these belts. They faced the Usos at WrestleMania, not necessarily just for the belts, but to conclude this whole storyline with the Bloodline. Obviously Kevin Owens fought Roman Reigns at Royal Rumble. Sami Zayn then fought Roman Reigns at Elimination Chamber. Then Kevin Owens and Sami together at WrestleMania. They then had the rematches at Backlash. So now that, they're removed from the Bloodline, and now they're also removed from having the titles themselves, it really is distancing them as far as possible from the Bloodline. And now it's really tying them more closely in with a feud with the Judgment Day. But you kind of wonder, Sami and Kevin, no belts, no Bloodline. You wonder where this is going from here, because it's the first time in a long time that Sami hasn't had a belt or been affiliated with the Bloodline. It's been over a year since that. So curious where we go from here. LA Knight, The Miz, John Cena as a special guest referee. What a good use of a guest host, right? The guest host thing is just a nonsense position to throw somebody out there so they can get some TV time. John Cena, he's going to draw the eyeballs. He drew the eyeballs, but good on him, right, to actually kind of do something as a guest host for the show. And I think the best part, obviously, was that tie-in between John Cena, super hot, obviously one of the greatest of all time, with LA Knight, the new hot thing. And that, even though LA Knight won, right, they didn't necessarily see eye to eye. It's that whole, today's quote-unquote hot thing versus yesterday's hot thing, and kind of that eras, stealing a line, from the Taylor Swift thing, eras situation here between old and new. And I do like that. And, hey, maybe WrestleMania next year, Philadelphia, LA Knight, John Cena. Who wouldn't like to see it? Another match on the card. I don't necessarily agree with the result, but whatever. Rey Mysterio, right? He is still the U.S. champion, defeating Austin Theory in a quick count, right? Not a quick count like a quick count. The match still went about 10 minutes long. It was the shortest match on the card, still at going 10 minutes long, but it didn't have that, finale that you were all expecting. It was that quick count. Rey Mysterio gets the win, and now, what's next for Austin Theory? It's going to be kind of interesting going forward with that, because, he was up there with the Gunthers of the world with these, long title reigns. He had the championship since Survivor Series of last year. He beat John Cena at WrestleMania with it, but now he's not the champion. He left the pay-per-view without the championship. So interesting where things from that going forward. The first match on the card, I think, stole the show. Becky Lynch, Trish Stratus. What a good match. And, people were talking about that should have been on the SummerSlam card. I'm glad it wasn't, because here it got its time. Here it got to breathe. Great match for these guys. Good use of the steel cage. Awesome. Even Trish Stratus got the big bump on her head. You can't fake that. A good match overall. Obviously, at the end, Zoe turning on Trish, kind of leaving Trish all by herself. Does that mean we're going to get a face turn? or more or less is Trish Stratus going to be heel all by herself and a face turn for Zoe Stark? More on that going forward, obviously. And then the main event, I really, really dig the anime intro they did for Shinsuke Nakamura. But one thing they kind of said in the intro for Shinsuke in his kind of elaborate entrance was the beginning of the end. And right there, it kind of told me the beginning of the end. I didn't think Seth Rollins was going to lose this match. He didn't, but it showed me that we're going to have more from this. And as the pay-per-view went off the air with Seth Rollins victorious, Shinsuke, attacks Seth Rollins off air. And obviously they showed it this past week on Monday Night Raw to kind of keep this storyline going forward. And I think the dud of the night, even though it went 17 minutes, Rhea Ripley, Raquel Rodriguez, a decent match. But overall, I think the dud of the night for WWE Payback. But you can't fault WWE right now, what they're doing with these pay-per-view events, these premium live events. They're putting them together well. Even if you have a dud on the card, the rest of the cards are solid because everything is getting its time. Every match is at least 10 to 15 minutes, maybe even longer in the 20-minute range. We had 2 matches over 20 minutes, 2 matches over 15 minutes. Not any filler. Everything had a meaning. You had Cody Rhodes on the card because, Roman's not on the card. So let's be real. Seth isn't necessarily the face of this company when Roman's not around. It's Cody, right? And you had him on the card doing the whole Jey Uso thing, which on YouTube and all social media platforms, I think got more views than anything else on this card. So that's pretty good. When you have a good pay-per-view card and then the non-match element that you had is one of the most talked about things after the pay-per-view itself. Just overall good, and I will say this much, if you haven't been to Pittsburgh, as Peter Rosenberg said on the pre-show, Pittsburgh, a very underrated city. It's too bad they don't have like a dome stadium so they could have the Royal Rumble in the wintertime. But definitely, I think, a WrestleMania caliber city. We won't see it next year. I don't know what I mean by that as the year after Philly, because I don't think they're going to go Philly-Pittsburgh. But maybe in a couple of years, right? WrestleMania in the Steel City. I'd love to see it. It'd be great. But WWE Payback this past week, and then Monday Night Raw, Gunther. He's going to overtake Honky Tonk Man as the longest reigning IC champion. So a big week in WWE. And let me ask you, is Gunther now the greatest intercontinental champion of all time? Or is Honky Tonk Man still the greatest in your eyes? Or maybe somebody else? Maybe leave a comment below this video if you're watching on YouTube. And or follow us at Heel to the Face on Twitter and let us know.